We're going to start with David Kelly, to discuss the fire protection system. One situation that I've run into in the past, and I'm sure other brokers have as well, is going into a building and not necessarily understanding what fire protection system's in place. So he's going to shed some light on what brokers need to look for and how they can possibly stay out of trouble and protect their clients' interests in regards to the sprinkler system. So if you could start by just defining or explain the different sprinkler classifications, including the different commodities that those sprinkler systems would protect.
All right, most sprinkler systems are going to fall in older buildings specifically, but most buildings will fall into light, ordinary, or extra hazard. Light being less likely to combust, and then you can get into storage over 12 feet, and they break it down into classes 1 through 4, 1 being the least combustible, 4 being highly combustible, and then you can break it down even further into plastics, higher storage. Anytime you get over storage over 12 feet, you're going to get into a class or classification of the hazard.
One term that we often hear, some people might not necessarily understand, RPZ valve or backflow preventer. How does that work into the sprinkler system?
Each city by state code requires some sort of a backflow device to stop the non-potable water that's basically in the sprinkler system from backfilling into the public domestic water. So they either require a double detector check, which is goes by the name of DDC, or an RPZ, which is just a double detector check, but it has a reduced pressure ability that stops. There's 2 check valves in it, and they're both spring loaded, and it's just like wearing suspenders in a belt. It's one additional item to stop you from having an issue, and they both must be annually certified by a licensed plumbing contractor.
What are 3 issues that you often encounter when quoting or working on a project that you tell brokers about to help us be better prepared?
I think the biggest thing from the contractor's perspective is to try to have an understanding of the building in question. Newer buildings, ideally, there's as-built drawings that are available. That's not always the case, and especially in older buildings, that information isn't available. So it's always good and beneficial to get contractors on board to maybe survey what those existing conditions are, so you know that information up front. Certain items that tend to cause problems with the pricing are, your underground utilities, where you have to go to get water or sanitary sewer to bring it to the office area, your electrical service size, where that's located. There's situations where the service may be clear on one side of the building and your prospective tenant is on the other side, and those can add some significant costs. Also the HVAC system, where those are located. Another big issue in older buildings is the condition of those units. There's situations where it's probably a good idea to have a HVAC subcontractor maybe do a deficiency report on some of those existing units, just to make sure that they're up to snuff. It's sometimes a little bit more complicated than just extending the ductwork and distributing it. You may have a problem with the unit as a whole, which can throw quite a big of a wrench in the situation. So really understanding the building and the conditions that you're walking into is critical. The second item of importance is a good understanding of your tenant and what their needs are. Obviously, the more specific information the contractor has, the more accurate our pricing can be. It specifics to the office area of the level of finish that they want, how many employees that they plan to have in the building, how many private offices versus open area. Those types of things are the obvious ones. And then, within the warehouse component, it's always good to know what they may be, what commodity they may be dealing with, how they're storing that commodity, how high that commodity is planning to be stored. Those types of things are all very important for us to be able to help provide accurate pricing in that process. And then probably the last one is something that comes up probably further along in the deal. It's hard to get a handle on it when you're taking a prospect around to several different buildings, but it's the code implications in the municipality at hand. Especially nowadays, it's really hard to get a handle. It's really open to interpretation as to what the municipality is going to require. New buildings are a little bit more straightforward, but old buildings, as soon as you walk in there and touch anything, oftentimes you're required to bring the entire building up to code, or certain things, whether it's fire alarm, a lot of the life safety, exit, emergency lights, those types of things. So At some point when the deal starts to get legs to it, it's good to possibly have some dialogue with that municipality, and again, try to work through any prospective issues that you may have to iron those out.
Okay. Next, we're going to hear from Joe Pomerenke from ACRO Murray. He's going to touch on several issues with buildings, including code compliance, electrical, and new technology they've seen in buildings. So, first question, Joe. What are three pieces, and similar to what you gave to Ben, what are three pieces of information that brokers need to know about industrial buildings or construction that you have found many brokers don't actually know?
There's a couple tricks of the trade. On the electrical, electrical is obviously a big deal. You got to know the electrical service that you're building, and you got to know the voltage, the amperage, and you got to have a general idea of how it's distributed, because like Ben said, that changes the price a lot. So what I look for on the electrical services, I just walk up to the main service gear and I read the nameplate on the big switch. So there's a box, it's got a big switch on it, it says 2,000 amps or 1,600 amps. And generally speaking, you can also read the voltage off of that box. It should say 2,000 amps, 480 volts. There's a difference between a rating of a switch though and the actual gear. So a lot of times you'll see 600 volts on the actual breaker, on the actual switch, but that just means that fuse is rated for a higher voltage than the actual service. So you gotta be careful about not misinterpreting that. So I always look at the heating system. I always ask the age of the heating system. Anytime it's over 10 years, I grow pretty concerned. A lot of those systems last about 12 to 15 years, up to 20 years if they have good maintenance, but a lot of times people aren't checking filters and belts and all the easy things to check. And really what happens to those units over time that I've seen is the coils corrode. So you'll get moisture in the heating coil and it'll actually rust and corrode. So sometimes the easiest thing to do is just replace some coils. So what I would recommend in a building that has a heating and cooling system that's over 10 years is to get a qualified mechanical contractor into the building and just do an efficiency report like Ben talked about, which is pretty easy.
And my final question for you, Joe, other than new energy efficient lighting, what are some other technologies you've been seeing implemented in either new construction or retrofits?
Well, there's a huge difference between what's out there and what we're actually seeing. Not a lot of people are willing to invest money up front to go with newer technologies and to go with more energy efficient means and methods to our construction and design. It's a little discouraging. I mean, it obviously makes sense being a finance-oriented person. You know, most of the paybacks for the items that are obvious, the paybacks that are less than 3 years, things like the T5 lighting, everybody's doing. So what you're seeing in the marketplace, I think, from a new technology perspective is a sort of trailing curve adoption of the things that are proven and that have a 3-year payback or less. Other things though that are happening outside of that, I mean, we've looked at everything from variable speed drives. That's a big thing. If you've ever got a fan that's over 3,000 CFM, you can put a variable speed drive on it and have less than a 3-year payback. A lot of people don't look at that for things like exhaust fans and for rooftop units. LED lighting starting to come into play more. People are really excited about it. I'm really excited about it. Currently though, the only cost scenario where it's really been economical is in cold storage. So if you have a freezer cooler project, freezer specifically, I'd highly encourage you to look at LED lighting. You can also do LED lighting in offices now though, and there's creative ways to use it in lieu of compact fluorescence and some of the pendant lights and decorative fixtures you can use it for. Otherwise, building automation systems are really where I think the industry is going. So and by building automation systems, right now what we're trying to do in most warehouses and in every office, we're putting in control systems that can actually set temperature set points in specific areas and monitor operation of equipment to understand how you can improve efficiency. And I think over time, and I don't know how that all ties in with the smart grid, but I think that power companies are getting a little smarter. They're going to be continuing to incentivize building owners with improvements. And the best way to get the most out of any of these energy efficiency improvements or new technologies is to have a highly functioning building automation system. So that's where I think we're headed.
Great insights.